Our next presenter is Will Sobieray, instructor for the PennDOT inspection certification courses and aids with course development. He actively serves as on-site support to both the bridge inspection section and the bridge asset management section of PennDOT Central Office, providing support to the development and maintenance of the bridge management system and the bridge care software. Welcome, Will.
Thank you, Rich, and thank you all for the opportunity to present here. Had a long conversation with my older son last night on telling him that I was doing a presentation on UAS work, and he's got one of those little micro drones, and so I said, well, why don't I bring it in and go ahead and fly it around for everyone, get their attention. We're in the last day, and then he reminded me how bad I suck at flying it, so you're all spared from that. But we had the opportunity at the beginning of COVID. Rich and I had got into some conversations. There was PennDOT was looking into new technologies, and hey, there's all this stuff going on with UAS. What are we going to do as PennDOT? So they had a steering committee was pulled together when it was kind of green lighted, saying, hey, this is something we want to look at. So we went ahead and in our conversation started to develop what are we going to do. So the project team here, Rich and them may have given this before at IBC. If you've seen it, you're going to get kind of a refresher. For me, first time presenting it, I apologize for however I mess it up. So project manager on the team, like Rich said, I do a lot of work. I've been helping central office since 2011, working within the inspection section. The other main primary members, we have Alicia McConnell, who is our UAS program manager, and John Zuliger, who is our rope access program manager. And between the two of them, a lot of times you'll see them together because as we're tackling larger complex structures and things, it's not like a single tool is used for inspection. We're coupling these technologies and techniques together to get a better inspection and to have better safety. First and foremost, we had to figure out, okay, what do we want to do with this pilot study that we're doing? No pun intended on the UAS stuff there, but so we got together and we started brainstorming as all of COVID's unfolding and things are locking down and we're trying to figure out when are we ever going to fly. We knew the main target is just determine if UAS for PennDOT Bridge Inspection Program is viable, what recommendations we can get out of it. Well, it's one thing to say I'm going to use a drone to do inspection work at all. We need to know what kind of drones. The market, if you've seen it, it's completely flooded with different technologies. New drones seem like they're popping up all the time. So we decided to go and look at what we had in our fleet that was existing at the time. We have quite a large fleet of drones and over 20-some pilots that are certified to fly. So we pulled from our inventory, made phone calls to who could we borrow drones from. It's always lovely when you say, hey, I want to take your couple $1,000 unit and buzz it around a while and then be okay with it. So we did get some loaners that helped with that, but we wanted to look at a selection of drones that were widely available in the market and looking at different price points, what's feasible. We know DOT funding and things, what can we do? We don't want to go say, hey, everyone gets Falcon 8s and we got stuff that's, greater than $10,000 a pop, if not a lot more. But then we also wanted to document, the various safety features of them. So we did a drone-by-drone analysis, and we'll talk later on about a matrix we pulled together that kind of gave a holistic overview, not only of the application of each drone, but also looking at, some of the benefits and features of each. Part of that was laying out, how does this fit into the day-to-day workflow? With that, we established that there's going to be 3 phases of the project. We're going to evaluate the basic parameters for the airframes themselves. Found isolated location. We're going to pick a fixed site, do some routine activities with them, and get just that. How do they look in terms of routine bridge inspection? And look at the different variables, as I mentioned, from a general standpoint. Phase 2 of it was to sit there and consider like a complex scenario. So in this case, we were looking at a structure that had cable supported. So things where you may put rope access and have individuals rappelling the various lines. Well, can we run a drone up it, save time, reduce the at-risk hours for our personnel? Third scenario is we were talking with the district, because it was out in District 11 we've done this, which was Pittsburgh area. They've had barge strikes to piers. So we decided we were going to do some pier evaluations and some night flight scenarios in case barge hitting a pier at the middle of the night. What do we do and how feasible is it? Execution was interesting. As I said, this is during COVID. So we finally got to go out into the field in November there of 2020. The one interesting factor that we ran into, well, this was like days after the election. So as we're getting ready, we thought like a couple days beforehand, we're getting reports that there's possible rioting or civil unrest. Are we able to go do what we want to do still? Luckily, everything was able to work out and we were fine. You can see, everyone was masked out in the field. Had to go through different COVID protocols. Both the internal PennDOT staff had to go through and get approvals to be out in the field during this time. We had our, scenarios that we had to do for Baker to get our personnel out there just to keep everybody safe. Had to look at, getting a sound methodology. So we established a methodology I'll get into a little bit later here to keep consistent and evaluate each drone on the same pattern. And we were using incrementation of how far is it away from a defect and things of that nature. That way everything's kind of getting a fair shake. Also looking at the recording the distance at which the defects are no longer able to be detected. And as I said, we developed a matrix to run through and do this comparison for all of it. Site locations, we had a variety of locations. We were trying to, figure out what was the best fit for this application. Getting somewhere where you can get some complex features, but you also get that run-of-the-mill, beams, abutments, piers, things like that. Now, we did scale back the amount of field work we would do with the UAS. We at first, our primary site we wanted to use was Fort Pitt Bridge. You can see it's the second bullet though because of some of the logistics we ran into. Again, during COVID and things and other aspects. You see people that go out there and just take a drone and throw it up wherever. Well, you're not allowed to do that kind of stuff. So we liked Fort Pitt because of the open area and there was a park access there. Well, you had to get special permission and a waiver to fly from the park because that's against the rules, so we didn't do that. We did use it as a secondary site because we were able to stay within PennDOT right away and find a launch point that fit our needs. But we also had a railroad there, and their right of way somehow extends to the moon, so you can't fly anywhere near that. And again, those civil unrest. So we settled at Neville Island. It was a nice structure that covered the items that we needed, and we'll kind of get into what we established there as our primary site. So with the site location, Neville Island is a Class B controlled airspace. So we were able to go through a land system, low altitude authorization notification system, and we had all the paperwork to get filed, get things lined up, pray for good weather, hope that it all works out. And honestly, couldn't have asked for a better scenario as far as even wind goes and things like that when we did actually get to fly. Our pilots were able to do what they needed to do to get everything lined up and get that. So that site there is the Neville Island site. So here's the group of UAS we tested. There's actually a seventh one that shows up in some of our documentation because there's a different variant to the DJI Mavic 2. We had a Mavic 2 Zoom that was out there that was PennDOT's. So PennDOT's pilot, we had one of their pilots on site at a couple of locations and did some of their own flying as well when we were doing this. So in this case, at the time, we used these 6 in our evaluation just due to the availability and whatnot. Kind of broke them up into what we called kind of 2 different form factors. So the top row there, not to slight them by any means, we kind of lumped them more as form factor 1 is like a consumer grade. So we generally more portable, lower price points on them, like the Skydio 2 there, I think is around $1,100. DJI Mavics you can get off Amazon. So if any one of you start pining to fly right afterwards, you can go get one next day. But then you get down into what we considered form factor 2, more commercial use. You have the form factor 1 ones are a fixed payload, where these guys on the bottom, the gimbals, you can swap out different things, like even adding in LiDAR on something like the Falcon 8 to get mesh scans and things like that. So a lot more higher price point there in the bottom that we're dealing with. Testing, I said the methodology. We had to come up with what do we want to do. Well, looking at defects, I can see a spall, I can see delaminated area, the thing that's probably the hardest to detect is looking at cracks. So when we're looking at the cracking, we kind of honed in our work to focus on, all right, if I went out and I looked at concrete, so we had nice concrete piers on Neville Island, so that worked as a nice control point. And then the approach spans had some good steel that we could get up in at. And so we combing through inspection reports and identifying previously identified defects so that we can use them as control points as we ran each UAS through it. One of the things we had to do each time, we want to make sure that we're calibrating the equipment out there. So you can see how we have in the imagery here, there's a crack comparator card that's held up against there. So we calibrate all of them at about 5 feet. And then what we did for both the steel and the concrete is we made demarcations on the ground at 5-foot increments going from 5 feet out to 40 feet. And what we would do is we would get the drone positioned in at each spot, capture the imagery, pull it back. I'll say here that the imagery that you'll see here, if you're sitting there like, wow, I really can't see the crack in this photo or that, these aren't the native photos. So obviously with them being in the PowerPoint, they're a lower resolution. It's quite different when you're looking at the native photo, able to zoom in on it and see the detail that you can actually capture out there with the equipment. Wanted to consider, like I said, the concrete, steel, and then we were looking at cables as well. We didn't have any pre-stress elements out in the field at this location, but we did have cracking that was at the upper threshold of going into CS2, so that's what we used as a control point on that same pier. Again, here's just some imagery showing the Falcon 8 at 10 feet, and then a zoomed in image of it. Again, not native photo, but you can see how we had marked on the pier there. Got our .012 for the RC reinforced concrete at CS2, and then right above it, kind of clipped out of the photo, was our control point for our pre-stress. And we just kind of, on each one, when we pulled the next drone up, we would go and snap our 5-foot increment photos. We maintained the same pilot the whole time. We wanted to get rid of pilot bias, where you just had, maybe someone favors one type or another, by having the same pilot evaluate everything, and they can give us contribute the look and feel that they had, what worked better. So we had our chief pilot out there that's got the most hours in out of our group, and so he's a real good control point for it, given his experience level and stuff, to try to eliminate some new person just about ready to wreck or nervous to fly around a bridge. So we also evaluated sensor capabilities. Some of the units, we were able to break apart the tablet from the controller so the pilot could focus just on flying and someone else could control the lens and the aperture, so we recorded that information as well. So also made a difference with our the lighting, depending on what pier you're hitting, where's the natural lighting, and then some of it you could photo enhance after in post-processing. Here's just showing some of the steel locations where we found interfaces at floor beams that had some cracking predefined, and so see the various structures that we had in there, or various points that we came in, questioning, can you really use this effectively on steel? Yeah, you can detect the crack. Definitely helps if the paint's cracking in a good spot. But again, native photographs are much better than what we have here. This is just showing some imagery from the Inspire 2 at 10 feet and then the Phantom 4 at 15 feet. Definitely apparent when we were zoomed in more with the pilot. Comfort level is a huge factor when you're trying to get up inside members, and how well a UAS can perform. Like the Skydio has really advanced obstacle detection, so it was able to weasel up into places that some of the other units you're just not comfortable being at. And then you can get wind vortexing close to members and things like that. So a lot of other environmental factors that can impact the flight itself that a veteran pilot may be able to counter a lot easier than someone fresh out there. And then we went on to our testing with complex cables. Photos here, typically we would go and do like a shoulder launch, and so we can put a TMA behind them for protection. This prevents, like, if I had to throw a man lift out there and I've got tires now jutting into the lane, I have to do a partial lane closure. So you can save on some things like that. But they would go ahead, and in a case like this, we would typically have a rope access team at the connection points doing a more detailed look, and then you can scan over things with the UAS. So just reducing, again, that personnel at risk hours. And you can get a good 360 view as you're going up and down with the UAS there. Just some of the imagery here from the Mavic 2 and the Skydio 2. And again, that Skydio honestly surprised us a lot throughout this of how well it performed, and it has a very nice price point, and it's very compact. Phase 3, we were talking about pier strikes. So what we ended up doing here, we're doing these night flights. We didn't do anything with what we called the form factor 1, the consumer grade, because it can't handle the payload needed to illuminate things. So down at Neville Island, we had to consider, putting lume cubes on the drones to get the area lit up well to try to simulate this. The imagery here is a little video with this that we're about 20 feet away. And I think this is the DJI-2, the Inspire, when it's going around. You can see with the masonry, even though the video looks a little jumpy here, when you're looking at it native and in the high res, you can really see some good definition in the masonry for inspection. And again, in this application, we're looking at, kind of an emergency quick assessment to get out there. So I may just need that safety factor to know that I can return tomorrow with a full team and closure. That was the scenario we were kind of working with. So did learn that with the zoom features, as the zoom would adjust on any of these, you had to control it and lock it down, because as the zoom adjusted, it would change our light aperture. And so we'd start to lose quality even with the lume cubes and such. So you had to keep that in mind. And then here's just a video showing, I think there's audio too, but this is showing Brian's doing the piloting and Alicia has the controls, and so she's adjusting that light as she's going. It makes a nice two-man team then, where he can just keep line of sight on there. One of the important things with night flights, typically you need a waiver. I mean, FAA wants you visiting a site during the day prior to any night flight. So if you're kind of trained and versed and ready for an emergency application, great. One of the things with the pilot you have to protect is night vision. So even while we were out here in the field doing this, we didn't have ideal scenario of takeoff location. We actually found an old traffic sign that was laid down, so that became our launch pad. It's kind of brutal standing there because about 10 feet away from that was a dead deer. So that made for some really aromatic flights. And especially when the props, everything would settle down, you're good, the props would kick up, and you're like, oh man. Brian would have to look away when anyone went to take a photo or anything so that he didn't get that flash and reduce his visibility so he could keep line of sight on the drone when he was out there. So just some issues we ran into. Again, we did get to go out to Fort Pitt. This is a nice example of the Skydio getting up in there. The photo on the right is actually the PennDOT D11 pilot that was out there with Brian. Brian's our pilot that's on the left there. Got some time with him, and he got, like I said, the Mavic zoom out. Here's a video. I can't speed it up, but this is showing you the Skydio going up between the members. And it doesn't come out as good as we'd like. The native video is better. That once we get up there and we start adjusting, you can see how dark the top of the bottom flange is. So that's where it's key to have that other operator be able to adjust the light aperture to handle that clarity. Move on with that. But here's where you'd start advancing that and getting better quality. But you can see how stable the Skydio is in between the beams there. More testing with the Pier Strike. This is just showing the lume cubes that were lit up. The difference with Fort Pitt, completely different experience. There's so much ambient light. One of the things we had a concern there, honestly, was flying too close to any of the decks and having a bunch of, passersby looking over and seeing what's rubbernecking and kind of getting lost in things. So, quick example of the takeoff. So, and that's the Inspire 2 lit up with lume cubes. And then the strobe on top, you have to have strobing on these. You need to be visible from 3 miles away with the airspace that we're in. So, really good image quality here on this pier, but what I like to get forward on, if it'll let me jump it, Problem with this video clip is it's longer and it won't let me jump ahead, because when you get up to the steel and you can see the quality that the loom cubes give us and the details on the bearings and such, it's a pretty nice image here. So I'll just let it creep up if I could speed it up. But yeah, everything slow and steady movements with all the drones. Again, just from a control standpoint, keeping you know, the commercial grade ones out there is what we liked using. And what we'll do is, in the couple minutes we have left, I'll have the matrix I'll run through and kind of what some of our findings were. You can see it's a really tall pier. But here you can see just with navigational lighting, but say we have an issue like, you know, bearing tip or something like that, we can get in there, get good imagery, and you can see that it's got pretty good video quality. Looking at the matrices that we created, doing the comparison, we looked at things as simple as what's the manufacturer state the battery life is, and what did we actually get out of it in the field. Went through different manufacturer specs, but then we also took that pilot perspective into it. You know, how did Brian feel with flying each one of them? What scenarios? And it was interesting to find that when one would excel at one area, it usually failed in another. So like the Skydio only has a 12 megapixel camera on it, so it's not that great, but its obstacle avoidance and stuff, it's phenomenal for getting up into the tight spaces. So it's a good application for like a more routine area, but if I need to do something more complex, more detailed, I'd go to something like an Inspire, get that higher res, better camera, or the Falcon 8, which is 32 megapixel. So, and then with that, we created a defect matrix. Kind of see how with reinforced concrete, you know, most of the drones, you can perform at around 10 feet and that's good. You want to kind of hold within that 5 to 10 foot, and when you're calibrating, that's what you get. You get line up where we're at and make sure that you're operating in those parameters. So conclusions, we said routine element for phase 1, Skydio 2 or similar was good. For a complex application, the Inspire 2 or similar. You know, Falcon 8's great. It's a really high price point on it as far as getting that out there at times. Like to purchase one of those for a fleet just not makes sense. And then it's good to have the right software and whatnot for post-processing. So updates for the UAS with PennDOT. It concluded the feasibility. There was an official report submitted to the steering committee. They were looking into setting up more PennDOT pilots and establishing training. So currently there's a Pub 840 out there, which is the UAS policy manual right now. They have tiered training going into, or that's in development. I think HR is looking into certification and such on the PennDOT side. And then they've determined a data storage, because it's great that we can collect all of this stuff, but it's how do you process the data? Big data is great, but you need to know how to leverage it. And with that, so in-house future things, more recruitment of pilots, equipment, purchases, and then just start working towards getting that internal staff trained. And then as far as the consultant world, make sure that you're showing your ability and you can get out there and start flying. So with that, that's the recommendations for PennDOT.
Will, thank you very much. Great presentation and a lot of great work. I've got two questions. First is like any part or like this report as a whole about the results, is it public that we can actually access and, you know, look at some of the findings? Or Rich, if you know it's going to be public?
We have it available. I don't know that we've posted it on our website or anything, but you know, we've given the presentations at several conferences, so we do have it if anybody would like to take a look at it.
And my second question is regarding, you know, those kind of nighttime inspections that you did, plus, you know, the lights, because I saw that there were like these bright lights on the drone itself when it was actually flying. How much of an effect, and I guess pretty high, did those lights have on the total inspection kind of duration before the battery dies and you got to come back and change the battery? And how disruptive did you find that if you had to do like any of it?
Yeah, I do believe that it shrinks the flight time. I forget exactly what it was, but you might only be looking at 30-minute battery life there. So you do have to plan accordingly to make sure either you're going to have to return, switch out battery, have those available. And it's really planning, you know exactly where you want to go so you can quickly see, but then you get out there, you might see something you weren't expecting, next thing you know, you fly back, so it
Yeah.
definitely adds a bit of disruption.
Some of the loom cubes are also, they charge themselves, they have their own power bank, so at least it's not drawing on the drone battery itself. So, but it makes to Rich's point, the weight, you have extra payload, it's going to impact the drone battery from that aspect. So at least it's not like double dipping on, you know, your flight time, but it does make an impact.
Yeah, I
Andy?
definitely like the results of the study you guys did, if I could
Yeah.
take a look at that. What's PennDOT's stance on DJI as far as using them as a drone supplier versus kind of barring them from being used?
Oh,
So-
barring them from being used. Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion as far as that and where they come from, you know, the supplier, things like that. PennDOT hasn't made a decision on, you know, which brand to specifically go to. I can tell you we're leaning towards, if a district contacts us and wants to buy one, we would recommend Skydio at this point. But that's still in discussion as far as barring them or, you know, because of security,
Yeah.
you know, the reasons behind that. So that's still in discussion, but no official word has come out that you cannot use that as far as from the Bureau of Aviation folks at PennDOT.
Yeah, and it's good to bring that up. I mean, if you go to get drones and put them in a certain application, make sure you understand the client and what their requirements are and the country of origin and such, because like if you're doing DoD work, you can't use DJI. If you're doing Army Corps work, you can't use DJI. That's the two locations right now, at least that I know of, that they're blacklisted. So, but just something to keep in mind. Good point, Andy.
Yeah, really nice study, and I too would be interested to see the final report. So if we just need to contact you to take a look at that'd be great. I'm just curious. I thought some years ago Federal Highway was looking at trying to do some kind of study investigation, almost similar to what you've done, and I don't know, that was 5-6 years ago. And what has Federal Highway been doing in this area?
Anybody hear from Federal Highway before I say anything? No,
Yeah.
I don't believe a report has come out. The latest that came out was, they did finally add verbiage supporting the use of drones as a supplement to the inspector, but they will never replace the inspector, especially for your fracture critical bridges. They highly support them as a tool in the toolbox, but you will never replace the need for a hands-on inspection for certain.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering more specifically, like at Turner Fairbanks with the NDT center they have there, whether there was any work coming out of there in terms of doing like an assessment and evaluation of different platforms like you've done.
The only thing I am aware of, we're part of a pooled fund with Purdue for setting up something similar to have a standardized testing program that if a new drone comes on the market, they basically, think of it like an obstacle course. They fly it through, and how well can it do at these 10 check marks? And so that any DOT or user who wants to know some sort of certification, because right now, like Will mentioned, there's so many products out there. So how does somebody in the inspection field know X is better than Z? And this would be one way to try to standardize it and give it a grade, if you will, so that drone users have something to go off of. So that is ongoing, but it is not completed yet.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.